Howdy! In this mini lecture we will discuss additional concepts of soil and agriculture. The student learning objectives of this mini lecture are: identify the causes and consequences of the Great Dust Bowl and what good came out of the Dust Bowl, identify various soil conservation best management practices, BMPs, differentiate between traditional and industrial agriculture, identify goals, methods, and processes of the Green Revolution, including the role Norman Borlaug played in this revolution, and evaluate the benefits and drawbacks of industrial agriculture and the Green Revolution. A discussion of soil and agriculture in the U.S. would be incomplete without a review of the Great Dust Bowl of the 1930s, which served as a turning point for American soil management practices. The breadbasket of America is largely in the ecoregion referred to as the Great Plains of North America, which is a temperate grassland. Prior to Western settlement, the vegetation in this region consisted of tall prairie grasses. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, farmers and ranchers settled in the area and began changing the landscape. Farmers began growing wheat and ranchers grazed their cattle on the prairie grasses which remained. They often expanded their operation onto unsuitable land, which caused erosion because they removed native grasses and changed soil structure by having thousands of cattle trample the land. The dry land practices of the farmers and the overgrazing caused by ranchers systematically destroyed the native prairie grasses of the Great Plains. In the 1930s, a perfect storm set in as an ongoing drought worsened and high winds set in. These conditions, combined with the agricultural and ranching practices of the day, created what we now called the Dust Bowl. 400,000 people left the region because of the devastation caused by the severe drought, high winds, and poor soil conservation practices. John Steinbeck's classic novel, The Grapes of Wrath, described the mass exodus of families fleeing the effects of the Dust Bowl. In response to the Dust Bowl, the U.S. government passed the Soil Conservation Act of 1935 and established the Soil Conservation Service, SCS. The agency at the time was charged with working with farmers to develop conservation plans for farmers and teach farmers best management practices which would conserve and protect the soil on their farm. Today, the SCS is known as the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS, and helps farmers not only with soil conservation, but with water quality protection and pollution control as well. Farmers can receive guidance and education about best management practices for their farms from agricultural extension services, which are tied to state universities. Texas A&M has such a service called Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. Extension services are a way in which the research conducted by professors at universities can be shared with and applied by everyday citizens. Extension service agents in the NRCS can share with and teach farmers a variety of techniques that can reduce the impact conventional cultivation has on soils. Each of the techniques mentioned on the next two slides are referred to as Best Management Practice, or BMP. The term BMP is very common in environmental science and is often used when referring to techniques to reduce erosion. Terracing is a technique that is used on very steep terrain to reduce erosion. Essentially, terracing alters a steep slope into a series of steps like a staircase, which allows farmers to cultivate a land on a slope without losing large quantities of soil or water downhill. Contour farming is another way of farming on a slope. Farmers using this BMP plow their furrows sideways across the hillside so that their band of crops is perpendicular to the slope and following the contour of the land. In this way, the side of each furrow will act as a barrier to soil and water attempting to flow downhill. Intercropping is the practice of alternating bands of crops in a field. For example, one band may be soybeans, the next corn, the next wheat, and then the pattern could repeat. Intercropping reduces erosion by providing more ground cover and reduces pest and/or disease infestation. Crop rotation is when farmers alternate the type of crop they grow in their field from season to season or year to year. By alternating crops, they allow soil to regenerate, reduce erosion, and break the cycle of disease or pest infestation associated with a particular crop. Farmers often will include soybeans and/or other legumes in the rotation because these crops have a symbiotic relationship with a nitrogen-fixing bacterium called rhizobium. By including legumes in the rotation, farmers can revitalize and regenerate nitrogen in their soil. For a field to lie fallow means that it has been plowed and harrowed. However, the land is not seeded for a season so that it can rest and rejuvenate. To harrow a field means to drive spikes through the soil to break up clods and root up weeds. Another BMP is cover crop. A cover crop is a crop grown specifically to hold the soil in place between times when the main food or fiber crops are being grown. Two other BMPs for protecting soil are shelter belts and conservation tillage. Shelter belts are essentially windbreaks created by rows of trees. Such rows are usually grown around the edges of fields to protect the interior crops from wind damage and to protect the soil from wind erosion. Conservation tillage is a technique that uses less tilling than conventional tilling. This means that more residue is left on the surface of the soil, which will ultimately reduce erosion, retain soil moisture, and help the soil rejuvenate nutrients. No-till farming, as the name implies, uses no tilling at all and is the ultimate form of conservation tillage. Agriculture, or the practice of raising crops and livestock for human use and consumption, began around 10,000 years ago. Up until the Industrial Revolution in the mid-1700s, agriculture was accomplished through human and animal power. Tools and machines were very simple, and most agriculture was subsistence, meaning farmers produced just enough for their own needs. Agriculture at this time was also polyculture, which means that farmers planted a variety of crops in one field. This type of agriculture is referred to as traditional agriculture. Traditional agriculture is still practiced today but has largely been replaced by industrial agriculture. Industrial agriculture was ushered in during the time of the Industrial Revolution. This type of agriculture relies on large-scale mechanization and oil, gas or coal to power the large machines used in cultivating crops. While industrial agriculture brought increased crop yields, it did so by introducing chemical pesticides, intensifying irrigation, and incorporation of artificial fertilizers. All of this led to crops being grown as a monoculture, which is a single genetically similar crop. While this method may be more efficient, it reduces diversity, makes the crop more susceptible to disease or pests, and reduces the variety of foods available for humans to eat. To provide perspective, industrial agriculture has caused a 90% reduction in biodiversity of fruits and vegetables in less than 50 years, so that now 90% of our food comes from only 15 crops. Industrial agriculture spread from developed nations to developing nations through the Green Revolution, which was by and large due to the work of American agricultural scientist Norman Borlaug. The Green Revolution began in the 1940s when Dr. Borlaug introduced a strain of wheat to Mexican farmers. This special strain of wheat was specifically bred to have a large seed head, be disease resistant, be resistant to wind damage, and produce high yields. This new variety of wheat is what allowed Mexico to become self-sufficient in wheat production and transition from an importer of wheat to an exporter of wheat in just 20 years. Norman Borlaug helped other developing nations, such as India and Pakistan, by bringing his specialty wheat to those countries and teaching them how to grow it efficiently. Ultimately, the Green Revolution was a movement that through technology advancements, improved crop varieties, and improved farming practices, crop yields, and therefore food availability were drastically increased. Because of his work in crop breeds, which included wheat, corn, and rice, developing countries were able to double, triple, or quadruple their crop yields, which helped save millions from starvation. Norman Borlaug was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970 in recognition of his contributions to fostering world peace by reducing global hunger. While industrial agriculture has allowed food production to keep up with our growing population, you should be aware of both the positive and negative implications of this method of food production. The obvious benefits are that crop yields have increased without the need for converting more pristine land into crop or rangeland. For reference, between 1961 and 2008, the population rose 100%. The food production to account for this growth rose 150%. However, the land converted to farmland or rangeland only increased by 10%. While these are seemingly optimistic and uplifting statistics, yields in many areas that benefit from the Green Revolution are declining due to soil degradation from heavy use of fertilizers, pesticides, and irrigation. Furthermore, the inputs to industrialized agriculture, namely fossil fuels, massive volumes of water, fertilizers, and pesticides, cause pollution, erosion, and desertification. Additionally, industrial agriculture requires significantly more energy than traditional agriculture. Finally, industrial agriculture often displaces low-income farmers because they can't afford to compete with the technology and money of large industrial farms. In this way, it's very difficult for small-time farmers to make a living because they're competing with huge conglomerate agriculture companies. This concludes the mini lecture on soil, agriculture, and the Green Revolution. Please review the weekly outline and complete the activities for this week per the schedule set forth in the outline. Thanks and gig 'em!